have in your garden right at the moment that you're working on?
These are some perennial herbs. We have parsley, rosemary, oregano, spearmint, and thyme.
Lily's Victory Garden. My brother Jack and I go every Saturday to collect tin cans and scrap for the war effort. We also pick up full cans of grease the Army uses to make bombs and bullets. Although how they make bullets out of bacon drippings, I have never figured out. This is Jack's paper route, so all the folks know him and our big brown dog, Thunder. We always collect from the Bishop's place. It's the biggest house with the biggest yard and a gold star service flag in the front window. Jack says their son, Ned Bishop, was the first soldier from our town to die in the war. Mr. Bishop walks to the bank every day now to save on ration gasoline and tires, but Mrs. Bishop doesn't go out much anymore. Jack goes up the long gravel drive to the Bishop's back porch. I wait at the sidewalk with Thunder. No noise, no dogs, no bothering Mrs. Bishop. It's early spring and the crocuses are just coming up through the hard earth. There are lots of purple and white flowers along the Bishop's drive. I kneel down for a closer look. Mrs. Bishop had the best garden ever, and even now the flowers can't stop coming up on their own. Hurry up, Lily, we'll be late for supper. Someday I'm going to have a big house with a big garden with every kind of flower growing all summer long. Right now all I have is a window box overlooking Federal Street from our third-floor apartment. Father says that war is a terrible thing, but good for business. He works full-time now at the aircraft plant. Mom has a job there, too. We might even be able to save enough money to buy a house after the war. Probably not as big as the Bishop's, but big enough to have a yard and garden. After supper every night, Father snaps on the radio and we listen to Mr. Gabriel Heater with the news of the war. Mr. Heater always says, there is a good news tonight. Sometimes the news doesn't seem very good to me. Then comes the best part of the day when Father and I read the paper together. I sit right next to him in his Morris chair and he holds the paper like a little tent with us just in it. First we read the funnies, then we pick one or two stories and I read them out loud. That's how I find out about almost everything, and that's how I decided to have my own Victory Garden. The mayor announced today that the Parks Council will turn Town Park into Victory Garden plots for citizens to help the war effort by growing vegetables. Plots will be available by lottery, and the Garden Club will offer seeds and gardening advice to those. With food being rationed, standing in line is something that we're all used to now. So I wait in a long line to fill out the forms for the Victory Garden Lottery. When I get to the table, Mr. Weeks, the Garden Club president, tells me I have to be 18 years old or part of a club for kids to qualify. Jack says, I told you so. I know where there's a big yard and space for a little garden that won't bother anybody. Jack and my parents will really be mad at me for asking, but I'm going to anyway. The gravel path crunches loudly under my feet and the doorbell chimes deep inside the house. At first it seems that no one is home, but Mr. Bishop opens the door. I hand him the Victory Garden leaflet and explain what I want and tell him I won't be a nuisance. It sounded better when I practiced it in my head. He looks at the paper and at me. I'm sorry, Lily, but Mrs. Bishop isn't well and we can't have any disturbance in the yard. A voice speaks from behind Mr. Bishop. Edwin, it can't hurt anything. Let her have the little kitchen garden that used to be near the garage. Mr. Bishop isn't happy about this, but he puts on his jacket and shows me the small plot of earth. I don't suppose you have any tools, he says. No, sir. Come on, then. He opens the small back shed. It's dim and dusty, but neatly stacked with rakes and hoes. You can use these. Now remember, no other children, no noise, no dogs. He shoots me a dirty look at Thunder, who has snuck up behind me. And no bothering Mrs. Bishop. I have the seeds and the instructions, but clearing the dead plants and roots and turning over the soil is harder than the leaflet says. I go every morning while my parents and Mr. Bishop are working, but the tools are big and there is a lot of work to do before I can plant anything. But on the fourth morning I come and the whole plot is neatly turned over and shaped into rows, just like the plan I had made on paper and left in the shed. I look around, but no one is there, and the house is just as shut up and gloomy as ever. The vegetable seeds have wonderful names like Detroit dark red beets, Kentucky wonder beans, Little Marvel peas, Clickley's sweet watermelon. You know how amazing they are going to be, even if they even before they start to grow. Every few days, a surprise appears. One hot morning, I find a straw hat sitting on top of the hoe. Another day, a little bench sits next to the garden. Sometimes I can see that the soil is wet from the watering can nearby, or that those sneaky little weeds that grow overnight have been pulled. The best surprise, of course, is the tiny green sprouts that begin to push through the earth. One morning, I'm expecting a frilly leaf to figure out whether it's a vegetable or a weed. "That's your carrot," a voice says behind me, and I jump a foot. A woman is standing at the corner of the garden. Her dress hangs on her like it is someone else's. I have never seen her before, but I know who she is. Mrs. Bishop starts to come for a little while every day. She knows everything about plants and flowers, even their names in Latin. She tells me that my name in Latin means blossoming flower. We walk around the yard, and she shows me all the plants and trees, tells me what they are, when they grow, everything. It's like walking downtown and suddenly knowing the names and stories of all the strangers. One day, a downpour catches us. Mrs. Bishop slips and falls in the muddy puddle between the rows of beans as she starts for the porch. I go to help her get up, but Thunder hears us and comes leaping in, knocking me into the mud too. Mrs. Bishop starts to laugh, and Thunder gets excited and barks, and wouldn't you know it, Mr. Bishop is in his bank suit, appears with his black umbrella around the corner of the garage. "Emma! Emma!" Mr. Bishop runs over to get Mrs. Bishop out of the mud and guides her into the dim house. He is upset and angry and tells me that the gardening is over and not to come any more. I run home in tears. Father and Mother know that I have been crying, so I have to tell them everything. Worse than being yelled at is that Father says he is disappointing in me. Wanting to help is a fine thing, but there is right ways to do it, and mine wasn't one of them. Everyone is quiet at supper. I lie down on my bed with Thunder as it gets dark. When I hear my parents answer the door and greet Mr. Bishop, I know things have just gotten worse. "Lily," Mother calls, "please come into the front room." When I get there, no one looks as mad as I expect. My parents smile at Mr. Bishop, who steps forward. "Lily, I am sorry about what happened today. I worry so much about Mrs. Bishop that I never noticed how much better she was getting. When I brought her inside, she told me how happy she has been working with you on the Victory Garden. Please come back to us tomorrow." He pauses, "and bring Thunder." A garden is a miraculous thing. You plant little seeds, you give them water, and keep the weeds off of them, and you get tomatoes and cucumbers and beans and squash and even really big pumpkins. Our president, Mr. Franklin D. Roosevelt, says on the radio that we are all one big fighting force, even the children. All these things we do that don't seem like much, well, they all add up. We are friends and neighbors and soldiers and citizens.